All right, I want to welcome Michelle Billington, whose husband, the Dynamite Kid, was the subject of the most recent Dark Side of the Ring episode to the show. Michelle, how are you?
Good. Thank you for having me on.
So the first question, and then we'll let Dave get into it, is I wanted to know if you saw the episode, and if you did, what your thoughts are on how it was handled, and your overall thoughts on how the episode was.
Yeah, Howard sent me like a preview to the show, so I was able to watch it before it aired. It was about 3 days before. And, it was very emotional. I watched it alone in my classroom when all the students had left. And I just wanted that for myself. And I just thought they did an excellent job of delivering the message I wanted delivered. And I was, very concerned and worried about giving someone, this story to be told. It's a story about healing and forgiveness. And yeah, I know it's the dark side and everybody wanted to know, about the violent part. But for me, that was the ending. There was so much more in the beginning and in the middle. And I thought it was just so sad that his legacy is erased just because of what happened in the end. So when I saw how they handled that, and I know Howard fought hard to keep that aspect in there, what I wanted to deliver, it could have just been another CNN, right? Like just focus on the violence and the partying, and that's what the people want to see. But it was like, for me, it was more about my kids and, his legacy and my kids.
When it
and
comes
that's what they delivered. So I was really pleased with it. It's just some of the reenactments where they were not accurate, but I mean, that was what they were imagining, and they had to be dramatic. So I understand that part too. But
what did your kids think of it?
Yeah, my girls were very happy with it. Like, we had discussed this as a family, and at first it was just Browan and I were the only ones going to be doing it. Amaris has always been, because the relationship that she didn't have with her father, she just didn't feel it was her place, and she's a very private person. I was really surprised that she actually wanted to do it. As it came closer, and Browan and I were talking about it, she joined in with us, and we're like, yay, like maybe Merrick will join. Merrick was in no way would he do something like that. He is super private. He and his wife even got married without me there or without her parents there, just because they're that private.
Mm-hmm. So he just didn't want the publicity or the exposure, so to speak?
Well, when you meet Merrick, he's one of those, he's very quiet as well. He's not somebody to start opening up about the past or talk, he just keeps the topic light. And those of us who are close to him, he's very close with Brett too. He's just not the kind of person to be talking to the world about his father.
Now with you, how did you kind of go through, because you and Tom split up like roughly 30 plus years ago, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So it's
1991.
So 30 years. So it's like, you were much, much younger. It was a huge part of your life, but it was also a long time ago. Is it something that do you think about it daily, or is it something that you have your own life? You're a school teacher, you've raised 3 kids without him. You've got your, you know what I mean? How, in your thought process, and I don't even know the last time, did you ever talk to him again after 1991?
Oh yes. Once in a blue moon, he would phone us and he would send cards or letters. I'm thinking it's maybe once or twice a year. Mm-hmm. Sometimes he would call, because all the kids' birthdays are in May and April. Amaris's is April 14th, Merrick's May 5th, and Browan's May 26th. So he would have the one kind of call right in between all of them and hit all the kids. But, it was few and far between. I think it was difficult for him to call too, like expense wise. And for all of us, it was like that. It's not like kids could go fly and see him.
Yeah.
Or because it was a money issue as well.
Yeah. I mean, your daughter did go.
But she went, she did go when she was 10 years old and my son was 7 and Amaris was 5. I was in just finishing my university. I still had summer courses to do. So he took, Bronwyn was acting out at school. And I'm like, oh my God, she's acting out. She needs her father. And Brett gave us some frequent flyers and he flew Merrick and Bronwyn to go see Tom. And they stayed there for the summer, 6 weeks.
Oh, wow.
While I was working on my degree. And that whole time, Bronwyn said, it was, he was living with a girl. She was so nice and kind, and she always phoned and updated me, but she'd say stuff like Tom's spoiling them, and he's ruining Merrick because he's letting him get away with stuff, and Merrick's having a tantrum, and Bronwyn would say, my mom doesn't allow Merrick to behave like that in public. And Tom would be like, he can do what he wants.
Yeah.
He called him the Tasmanian devil, and he had a tattoo of Merrick, the Tasmanian devil, on his arm. He said it was Merrick. He called him Little Tommy.
Mm-hmm.
But and then they didn't see him after that. Bronwyn had, around the age of 16, she wrote him a letter and said, I've been through so much, and I just realized that if you just would have stayed in Canada, we could have seen you all the time, and you could have been here when I was growing up. Why didn't you do that? And anyway, Tom thought that was very rude, and he never called again. And I think it really hurt him, and she was, expressing her feelings, and that's what people do, and he didn't like that. So that relationship was severed from that letter that she had sent. So she took it upon herself to go see him once she had her child to, to connect again with him, and which she did. He wasn't going to sit down and talk about their feelings, and he wasn't like that. And that's not how he rolled.
Mm-hmm. He was already wrestling when you met him in Stampede Wrestling, and I know. Did Julie know Brett first, or did you all meet at the same time, or how did that all work out?
Yeah, I was 16 when I met Tom. Julie had already been dating Brett for about a year, and she was living with him, and I lived in Regina. Well, Julie and I lived in Regina, and Julie moved to Calgary to be with Brett, and I would come and visit Julie. So sometimes when they were wrestling in Regina, Brett would bring me back to Calgary to stay with them for, a week or two, and then take me back home via the road trip.
Right.
When they went back. And then he started a big thing with Tom, and I was just like, wow, look at that guy in the ring. I just couldn't believe it, but I didn't want to say that I liked him too much because Brett was wrestling him, and we were both kayfabe. Julie didn't know anything about wrestling, neither did I. So I was like, oh my God, that guy that's beating up Brett is so hot. Look at how he comes around so fast. He's so athletic, and he had long hair, and he had the big streaks in. I think he got those in Germany, and I was like, wow. And he liked me too, but I didn't know that. He just would say hi to me or talk to me from behind because he just beat up Brett. And he told me I was somehow supposed to know that was a hint that he was talking to me. Because I never come out of the dressing room and talk to birds. You should have known. I was like, I don't know. I thought you were just being polite. So we even went on a double date after we knew wrestling was, a closed secret society. We went on a date and a double date, and Brett had his black toque on, and Tom had the sheepskin aviator hat, kayfabe hat, he called it, and it had the flaps, like sheepskin flaps. And we went to see the Aristocats, the Disney movie.
Mm-hmm.
And we were like sneaking in, worried that wrestling fans were going to notice us. But of course, what adults go to the Aristocats at the last show of the night? It was 9:00 at night or something. So they had a soft spot for the cartoon.
So now, it's like Tom is such a, an interesting, fascinating character in the world of wrestling, from both, he was a spectacular performer, and, he got in a lot of trouble, and he was, kind of a legend in Japan. Did you ever go to Japan with him?
They kept asking me to come over, and Tom was saying, no, I don't want you to come, because if you come, I'll have to stay longer. Mm-hmm. He just wanted to come home. Like he didn't, all the other wrestlers were like, enjoying the raw sushi and everything. He wasn't like that. He was a very beans on toast type of guy. Mm-hmm. And he was like, I'm so sick of eating ramen noodles or whatever those were. And
yeah,
he said if he did eat well, it was so expensive, like the Ribera Steakhouse.
Yeah,
$100 back then too. $100 a night for steaks, unless the mafia guys bought them dinner.
Yeah,
it was like leather jackets and the steakhouse.
Yeah, the steakhouse that Bruiser Brody found and became the big wrestling hangout. Yeah.
I'd love to go there though, because I see the pictures, and
there's pictures of them there still.
Yeah, I see them in the magazines, and I know I still get wrestling magazines sent to us, like fans that send them to my daughter.
I mean, did you understand what a big star he was in Japan, or was that just something that you kind of figured?
He never wanted me to act like a fan. And I didn't, because we just met as young kids, and then, he slowly got bigger. But like when he won the belt, he brought that home, and I bet it was in his suitcase until I went to do the laundry. I didn't even know the belt was in there. Mm-hmm. I was like, oh, you got the belt. And he goes, yeah, they put it on me. They said I could bring it home. I was like, oh, okay. And that's all we said.
Yeah.
That's all we said. Or he's like, oh, I got more fucking trophies. And I was like, oh, do ya? Geez, sorry, Tom. Because he's like, I fucking got rid of them. I gave Davey 2 of them, and here's 6 more. And I was like, the plaques and the,
yeah.
He would just give them away because he didn't want to carry them. He just said it was a pain. So to him, it was a job, and that world champion. I know he knew it was something, but he always acted like it wasn't. That was just a job, and he's the guy with the belt. Now he has to carry it around. Boo-hoo.
It's weird because the idea of just a job, while he probably put more into it, both when it came to creativity and physically for sure, than, almost anyone from the era, and all these people for the next several decades that watched his stuff, all, everyone tried to emulate, his walk and his ring outfit, and, all these people who were, from Jushin Liger to Chris Benoit to everyone who copied Jushin Liger and Chris Benoit, which is another, dozens and dozens of people, to every kid who grew up in Calgary that got into wrestling. It's kind of interesting in that sense that he, it wasn't, he didn't act like it was a big deal when, it really was a big deal when in the wrestling industry.
Well, to him, it was a work.
Yeah.
And he just, that's why he would get upset when people would come in with these big heads and they were being arrogant. And, to him, it was a job, and everybody had their place. And if someone is too big headed, or, they start believing their own gimmick, then it starts affecting what's going on out there. It starts affecting the show.
Is there a point or a series of things or time or whatever? Did you see a slow change in him, or was it things that you could see early but didn't really manifest until later? How would you kind of describe,
Well, to me, it was like the injuries and the having to take pain, self-medicating just to get through. Because he, when I met him, he didn't even drink. He drank orange juice, and I was the one had a drink or two. Like I was the one saying, "Oh, can I buy some sherry? Is it okay if I have some wine?" And he just always had orange juice. And then we lived with Wayne Hart for, like, they owned a duplex together, a fourplex, and we lived on one half of it for 3 years. And Darkside interviewed Wayne, and I just heard Darkside's podcast, and they kept saying Wayne was working them. He didn't give them anything. There must have been wild parties. And I was like, Tom didn't even drink. Tom might have X-laxed the neighbor, but it wasn't no real funny business going on, right?
Yeah.
No, even when I went over there, Brett said, make sure you don't accept hot chocolate. And I was like, what? I'm just telling you, don't accept any hot chocolate. So he offered me a cup of tea, and I thought, well, that's okay. You can't put X-lax in tea. But they're like, they think Wayne was working them. They said they gave him nothing. They said Tom left a chicken cutlet out once, and the cat dragged it downstairs. And I'm like, yeah, that's about as exciting as it got. So and I always attributed it to, he's self-medicating. He's in severe pain. Like, I can't imagine. And he never complained. Like, if he says, oh, I got a sore back, it's like, oh, yeah, okay, well, here's an ice pack or something. But the amount of pain he must have been in. Like, if it was me, I would have been like, my back, even his shoulder. He said his shoulder was bothering him. He was getting cortisone shots in his shoulder every time he came off the road.
Wow.
Then when they opened him up, like I said, there was, the ligaments weren't even attached to the bone.
Wow.
And his back, it wasn't, just the Hamilton when Rocco, I don't even think he kicked him in the back. It just looks like from the angle that he did, but his back just went. It just went. He's told me the first time that he really, really hurt it was with Tiger Mask. And Dave, you're so good with these things. I listen to you all the time. But there's a match with Tiger Mask where they restart the match.
That's the 1983 match.
And he hits the side, the guardrail outside the ring, and it bends.
So that's the one where he was whipped in and he went in at like this really fast speed, because that was his trademark back then. Is he would run so fast into the guardrail and knock it flying, and you would just go like, how, it's like, that's one of those things you just look back and just go like, how does a human, I mean, and he did stuff like that, where it's just like, how does a human do it?
That particular one that you could see it's bent, and he would, when he was watching the match, he was like, right there, right, fucking there, and that bent. That was the beginning, and then it would hurt, but then it was another big hit was when he was going for the world title and did the suplex with Davey over the top, and his back hit the apron.
Right.
And that was another, like, a major one. So, and then, the continuous bumps after that. But, after that one with Davey, I think it was really bothering him then.
How did, when he was going like 86, 85, 86 with WWE, when they were doing the insane schedule, I mean, was that kind of, how was that like for you and for, and everything like that? Because it went from like,
well, we were single parents. All the women at home, like Diana and me and Ellie and Jules, we were all single parents. So easy for me too to just be a single parent because I always was one.
Yeah.
And it was sad, and they always wanted to come home. And then when they came home, like when Tom came home, and he was taking a break and getting his shoulder, he got the shoulder operation. It's like they didn't want to be home because they weren't even used to being home. It was always like they were visiting.
Yeah,
we didn't think that, but when it was started to stop, it was like, gee, they're
I mean, it's a weird
being on the road.
It's a weird thing because you kind of get intoxicated with the idea of performing in front of thousands and thousands of people every night in a big arena, and then you know what I mean. And it's just a different. And then you come home and you're a real person, and then it's kind of like you almost when 300 days are there and 60 days are here. You know what I mean? It's like. You're like it's a really weird. I think it's a really weird feeling maybe for them. I don't know.
Well, in the end, I think coming home was to detox.
Yeah.
But I'm like, hey, I've been waiting. I've been waiting to go out for supper with friends, and and then it's like I can't go hang out with Davey and Diana because he's been with Davey the whole time. He doesn't, it's just like Brett didn't want to see Jim either. When Jim and Ellie lived here, it's like we've just been with these people this whole time.
Yeah.
I was like, well, gee. So yeah, it was tough, and we were on the road like 21 days and 3 days off, I believe. Like it was horrible.
Yeah.
It's like at least when he went to Japan, he came home.
Right. He'd come home and he would work in the area. Like when he was not in Japan, he was working in the area. So he was, I mean, it's still travel, but it's not the same kind of travel. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're home most of the nights. Yeah.
From the perspective of the wrestling wife, I've actually had a conversation with there's a basketball player. His name is Andre Iguodala, and I had a conversation with his wife one time, and we were just talking about how her life is when he's home and how her life is when he's not home, and sort of the routine, and athletes have the specific routine, and he's working out the same time every day, and so her life sort of has to fit into that lifestyle of his because he's a professional athlete. How was that with you? And I'm assuming other wives of wrestlers from that time frame, which is, when the husband comes back, like your routine also changes. You have a specific routine with the kids and with everything, and then when your husband comes back, like it kind of changes what your day to day is like. Can you kind of describe what that was like?
Well, in the beginning, like I was 16. I was living with Tom when I was 16. Like I left home when I was 15. And I know that might seem weird, but I mean, in those days, my grandmothers, they were married at 14. And I don't know, my mom had 2 marriages, and I was the last daughter from her first marriage, and she had this whole four younger kids to raise. So I don't know, I guess at 14 I was going into the bars. Mm-hmm. And I looked like I was 19, and I came from humble beginnings in Regina. I was raised in North Central. I say Tom's from Northern England. I was from North Central Regina, where even to this day, cab drivers don't want to go there at night. But I'm very comfortable there. Like, he was raised in a fighting culture, and I was raised in North Central Regina. So, I got along great with him. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I am a survivor, and I think I have a lot of survivor instincts, and those worked well with me.
When the thing with CNN happened, I mean, what was going through your head at the time? I mean, because it was a weird time. Obviously, it was a weird time for you going through everything. Like, how did it kind of How did it materialize?
Well, I was shocked. Like, I was in Banff when I heard the news that Chris, was killed, and his wife and his son. And I was like, oh my God, because we're all a close, tight community here in Calgary. And even if we hadn't seen each other for 10 years, we're still, we're all very close. Like, I'm telling you, it's a closed society. Not so much anymore now that the wrestling business has been exposed, but you didn't let outsiders in. And a lot of what Tom was doing in the dressing room was making sure that people that shouldn't be in wrestling were not in wrestling. I'm not saying that that's a good thing. I'm just saying that's just how it was.
Yeah.
Are you tough enough? Do you have what it got? Are you, to survive this lifestyle? So anyway, when I heard the news and then it came out that he had done that to his wife and child, it made me think, oh my God, see, I never felt that Tom was going to do it. Like, when I say I called his bluff, I was like, yeah, you're all like, blah, 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 like how you are in the ring, and you're sure, you're going to shoot me. No, you're not. Like, come on. I always believed that he wouldn't. And he didn't. But I thought, oh, Chris,
did.
He might have needed some help. And men do not access mental health. They don't access help. They don't admit it. Like, women are more apt to, right? And I just thought, well, if I go on there and I say, how Tom was, and then he should have got help and I should have got help. And after I went to university and I learned so much more, and because I was a grade 9 dropout when I met Tom, I had no education. I was very naive and young and in love, and so was he. And he was in his early 20s, and he's the world champion. And we used to like stay up all night till like 6 a.m, go to bed when the birds are singing, set our alarm clock so we could make the bank, because we'd wake up at 4:30 and go, oh, damn it, we missed the bank again. Because there was no like you didn't have credit cards in those days. You had to physically go to the bank, and we'd have to set our alarm. It was like 3 or 4 days before we actually woke up to the, in time to get to the bank. But that was the lifestyle that we had. So when I went on there, they said, Bret Hart recommended you. And I was like, oh, Bret must want me to talk about domestic violence. Like, I'm always the teacher. I want to teach people the signs of depression. And my brother committed suicide. First year I started university.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, and I went to survivor groups, because just dealing with all this pain and, not letting it bring you down. You can't do it by yourself. You need professional help. I had all the support from my friends and family, but I needed professional help. Tom needed professional help. So I thought, well, if I go on CNN, then people will know to access help. Here's a macho man that needed some help and he didn't get help. But that's not how it came across at all. So that's why I was really pleased too with Dark Side, because they did portray what I wanted them to.
Is it, it's interesting because a lot of people who watched it, and they hear the stuff, and yet at the same time they hear, and people would ask me, and they go like, how do you talk about this stuff when you have that second part? And I go like, you met and you probably had great years, and then they maybe weren't so great, obviously, and you split up, and then but years later when you look back, you remember the good and the bad both, and there was the good. So
well, and it's my grandchildren. My grandchildren are going to, well, my eldest is 13. She's going to be listening to this stuff.
Yeah.
And I want her to know there was like some fantastic, well, there's so much more to Tom than just those last, I would say, 5 years.
Yeah.
The last 5 years, and how injured he was. And people are like, oh, you're making excuses for him. I'm like, no, I'm telling you like it was. I'm telling you like it was.
Yeah.
Those were brutal, the road trips. And people are messaging me from around the world, and they're saying, "Oh, I can just connect with you." And I have a stepson who had 2 brain injuries, and he's not the same person. And I was like, "Yeah, two concussions that person had, and a total personality change, never the same."
Yeah.
I was like, imagine how many concussions Tom had, and can you imagine what that hit from Rougeau did to him?
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah.
Can you imagine? And CTE, if you look into it, the family doesn't even notice it's happening. Like it happens slowly. It won't happen immediately after a concussion, but it happens slowly. And Tom was like, he was in the snake pit. Like, did you see his ears? His cauliflower ears? Like, I'm sure he had a lot of brain injuries. He played rugby. Like, hard hitting. There's no pads or helmets in rugby. So, but when you're looking at a 24-year-old Tom's brain, it's already, on its way.
Yeah. Now, when did you kind of come to grips with all this? Because did you come to grips with that like in recent years, or did you kind of know it as it was happening, or did you understand what was happening when it was happening?
No, I knew nothing. I mean, we're just all, we were uneducated. I mean, look at the way we raised our children. Like, I have pictures of people smoking cigarettes in front of my newborn baby. It was totally acceptable. Everybody in the picture has a cigarette in their hand, and there's a newborn baby on the table. Totally acceptable. Tom and I, we had bull mastiffs, like the big dogs, like Butkus in Rocky. Those big dogs like that. So he had a Corvette, a Silver 73 Silver Anniversary Edition with mirrored T-tops, just a beautiful car. So we had no room for Brahman and the dog, so they just rolled around in the back. This is a 200-pound dog and a 2-year-old rolling around the back there. And it was totally acceptable. We didn't even have a thing called car seats.
Yeah.
So when you say, to look back and judge, that's what annoys me too. I was like, yes, if I am who I am right now, hell no, that wouldn't happen. But, that's the way it was. The culture, that's what the culture was.
Was it difficult for you and even for Julie to, I would say, amalgamate into the wrestling world? Because the wrestling world is in Calgary and everywhere it's very different from the outside world in a lot of ways. It's filled with characters, really. Yeah,
but it was great because we went up to Stu and Helen's, and Brett took us up there on Sundays for Sunday dinner. And honestly, it was like going up to see the Kennedys, because they were the Kennedys of Calgary. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, everyone's got big, beautiful teeth, and they're tanned, and their skin. I was like, everyone's just gorgeous. And they played the football. And then Brett's like, oh, you and Julie can play with us. And then we just watched for a few minutes, and I'm like, no, we're not playing. I go, Julie, they're taking this serious. And she goes, I know. So we were just like, no, thank you. Like, we'll just watch over here. But it was such a great way to be introduced to it, because Diana and Allison, Ellie, and Georgia, such sweethearts, and just made us feel like welcomed us into the family. And Helen was so gracious. I was like, wow, I was expecting a real tough broad or something, but she was like the opposite. She was like the classiest lady, from New York City, and hello, darling, and we did our little name cards, and she'd sit all her new guests right beside her, so it was like a special spot. And we were eased into it that way. And there would be wrestlers up there, and coming up, or Harley Race sitting there smoking in Stu's dining room with the Chippendale chairs and big crystal ashtray. Him and Tom were the only ones that could smoke, or that smoked in Stu's house.
So Stu must have treated them like they were special.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the kids thought Harley was a real king.
That's
They're all like, "Oh, the
hilarious.
king is here." They really did. They thought he was the king.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he kind of was in that world.
He
Yeah.
was like a father to Tom.
Yeah, I know he definitely respected, all of those wrestlers from that generation, like the Funks and everything. I mean, I think that because of their kindred spirits in a lot of ways, they saw Tom as like, it was a different, it's funny because sometimes now when the younger wrestlers, get creative and everything, a lot of the older wrestlers were, like, oh, don't do this, don't do that, and everything. But I know, like with that generation with Tom, I never heard anyone say anything negative. It was always like they were proud of him, taking the art to another level in his guts and that aspect of it. I mean, it was, they were always praising him. It was not like now where if somebody came and did the same things, they would just go, oh, you don't know what you're doing, and blah, blah, blah.
They're snowflakes is what they are. Yeah, and when you rode in those cars with those veterans, they taught you. And I love Tom's book. I accidentally found his book in a book bin at the shopping mall. I was just shopping and I was like, oh, I didn't know Tom wrote a book. I thought, well, I should buy some for the kids. So I bought 4, one for myself, and they were like $10 each or something. And I came home and I read it, and I felt like he was right there talking to me, because the girl really, wrote it in the way that he spoke, like his sentence structure and everything. Mm-hmm. And I enjoyed the book. Mm-hmm. I don't know, people who read it enjoy it. And I think it was the first book that told the truth, like told it like it was, like he's like, yeah, I drank, I did cocaine.
It was definitely honest at a different level of the books then. I mean, there have been books since, but yes, at that point it was, the books were, besides like the fantasy of the wrestling, they would also, nobody was talking about the drugs and that type of stuff in previous books. It was a groundbreaking book in that regard. Yeah. And the money and the things like just everything, and the happiness and unhappiness, mixed feelings of different parts of your career and, just going through life. But, sorry. No, go ahead.
No, he, I was just a little disappointed that he, didn't write more about the kids, but it wasn't a topic that he could really express. So, and then the last part where he said, I hope my kids are proud of me when they watch the videotapes. And I just thought that just angered me. And the kids are like, did he talk about us in there, Mom? I was like, oh, yeah, you got a sentence here. And I read it to them.
Yeah. Maybe it hurt, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I can't imagine because there's so many aspects of him that are hard to really comprehend. So it's hard to like imagine like what his thought process really was through all of these different things, and then how it would have changed, with all the bumps on the head that he took and things like that over the years. And, the other part of that too is I think that the concussions, I don't think, I mean, they do lead to depression. I mean, it's like, and I've seen this in wrestlers and in football players too, where the ones after they've taken really, when they, and it manifests more when they're older than when they're younger, because it's one of those things where so it's like, he was probably, if you think about it, when he was in his 40s and his 50s, imagine, I mean, like, you're this great athlete.
There's no impulse control. That's for sure.
Yeah. But you're this great athlete who had a lot of fame, and now you're in a wheelchair, and, whatever, you've got kids in another continent, and it's, I don't, it's just hard to, it had to have been tough for him, and
I think
yet
it was painful.
Yeah.
I think it was so, when you're raised in a fighting culture, and I say fighting culture because, all his role models were boxers, like his grandfather, who he's named after, Thomas, and his dad, Bill, and his uncle Eric. They were boxers. And Tom used to say, my dad won't tell me that boxing's fixed, that he took a dive. They asked him to take a dive, and that's why he quit. He won't admit it. And I was like, oh, I don't know, Tom. And then his dad never did ever say that boxing was fixed, so we still don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But, like you don't show emotion other than anger. It's a sign of weakness. And I understand that from Regina, from North Central. Like you don't show your emotions. You don't, you'll get eaten alive. It's a sign of weakness that someone will get at you for it. So all that, like that torture that they go through when they're training them, and he did go through a lot of torture, 3 years, like from 13 to 16. And by the time he faced those men in the ring, like he had more training than most of them. And he was tough.
Yeah.
Never gave up. Never tapped out. And so I think he thought he was, well, I know he was trained to do that, to toughen up the up and coming guys. And also to keep them in their place. I think Brett said in an interview that Tom was the little pit bull of the dressing room that kept the dressing room under control. And that if Tom was there when Shawn Michaels was pulling his crap or DX, that it would never have happened. And I was like, okay, well, it's a contradiction. On one time you say he's the the enforcer in the dressing room to keep everything under control, and then the next minute he's a bully. So what is it? And back then, that's how it was.
Mm-hmm.
Like today's standards, if you went in the dressing room and did that, he's a bully.
It's a different world. It's a different world now. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
And Stu stretching people like that.
Yeah.
That's just the way it was. Like we didn't walk around going, "Oh, Stu's a bully. Stu's a bully." And I'm getting so tired of hearing that, And I know I do know though, like the last, 5 years, I'd say yes, it was excessive. But how much was that his brain injury?
Yeah.
Like Big Daddy Ritter owed him $1,000. He was supposed to pay for a cape. They were going to have matching capes or something for the wrestling, and Tom gave him $1,000. $1,000 in 1979 was a lot of money. And so when Tom saw him in New York, he was like, "Oh, you owe me $1,000." Like he didn't go up to him and punch him out.
Yeah.
Like he would have in, 89. So, and, even Evan Howard not being happy with Wayne Hart's stories when we first started living with him, that is the truth. It was not like that. And I don't know if you guys could even imagine wrestling like how he did and how injured he was and how much drugs and, prescription drugs and drinking he did just to cope with the pain. Yeah. I'm sure he was pretty messed up. I had a bad arm, like I taught phys ed last year, and I had a torn ligament on my shoulder. And if I even bumped into the wall, like it would make me cry, like, ah. Or if I had to like lift my arm up, it was like a knife inside my shoulder. And then I felt so much empathy for Tom because I'm like, I just have a slight tear in mine. And his was right off the bone. I can't imagine. And he wrestled like that for 3 years.
Yeah.
So people are like, she's an enabler. No, I'm not an enabler. I asked him to leave. Okay. I did try and keep the marriage together. because I never wanted us to have a broken home. I came from a broken home, and I didn't want to give my kids a broken home. But, when that aspect of the violence was coming into our home, and I couldn't hide it, when he came home with his face cut open on that, like, I don't know if you guys saw Dark. Yeah, you saw Dark.
I saw that. I know
you saw it. But that night really told me, like, you can't hide this from the kids anymore. Like, when I looked at Bronwyn's face and how scared Merrick was, and, that something had happened to their dad, and he was like, "Oh, I just fell down, little girl." I was like, "Oh, my God. Can't do this anymore." And what they cut out, what I did also say, Dave, was he fixes his shoulder. He goes to Japan with Johnny Smith as the British Bruisers, and he comes back and he says he has a sore neck. And I'm like, "Oh, sore neck. Let's go right now. We got to make sure that's okay now. Like, let's be on top of this now. We're not going to, let it go." To that point, like, the shredded discs tied up in his spinal cord and the arm hanging off the bone, like, So we go there, and they said, one hit to your neck and you're going to be paralyzed from the neck down. And I said, "Okay, that's it, Tom. Like, you're not wrestling anymore. Like, we owned our house. We had one more payment on our Bronco, and we're going to be fine. Like, I'm a waitress," because that was my job when I met him. I go, "I can be a waitress in town." We had an acreage just outside of Cochrane, a little town outside of Calgary. And it was very cheap to live out there. And I said, "All we have is our property tax." We had our own water well, like, we didn't have big utility bills. And he had a wrestling ring out in the back there. You saw it on Dark Side. And I said, "You can train people. I bet Japan would want a Dynamite Kids school here." And he just got so mad at me. He said, "Nobody charged me to learn how to fucking wrestle." He was so mad that I even, like, would dream that up. And I go, okay, I'll be a waitress and you can pump gas. Like, we do not need a lot of money. And he's just, all of a sudden his identity, and I was looking at him, I was so upset, saying, like, "You always said don't believe your own gimmick. Like, what is this?" But I was, having my own issues with depression. We were not communicating, that's for sure. We were like ships in the night. He'd come in from going out with the boys and go to bed. I'd be getting up with the kids,
Mm-hmm.
And it just, I just said it wasn't, I'm not going to live the rest of my life like that. This is not the life I want for my children. I saw enough of that growing up. I did not want my kids to see it. But it wasn't Tom. It was
it was what he became.
Different person there. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was still in there, though. He was still in there.
Well, I want to thank you so much for doing the show, and it's tough. It's a tough topic. It's an interesting topic, and I'm glad.
This is healing for us. So I hope people realize, why we did it, and we want to raise awareness, and that if anyone's out there, like, feeling at the end of the rope, they just need to access help. Like, it's one click away on Google, mental health, 911 if you have to, there's always someone there to help you.